My new job came with a strange set of rules, like never granting a long-dead professor access to his lab. I thought it was a prank until my trainer told me about my predecessor. Now he's the reason rule number 2 exists, and his screams are the price for keeping the basement door shut. Guilt is a stubborn stain. It's not like dirt you can scrub off. It's more like a chemical burn that seeps into the very grain of you, changing your composition. I'd been running from mine for 3 months, trading a home for a string of cheap motels that all smelled of stale smoke and despair. My wife, Sarah, was gone. My life, the one we built, was a crater of ash and memory, and in the center of it all stood me, the architect of the ruin. My grandfather's voice was a constant, gravelly whisper in the back of my mind, a ghost I couldn't outrun. "Be careful where you go to hide, Caleb," he'd warned me years ago, his eyes dark with the superstitions of the old country. "Some places, the earth is like a bitter old banker. It keeps receipts for every sin, and it always collects." I was looking for a place so anonymous, so vast and empty, that my receipt would get lost in the filing. That's how I found myself hunched over a flickering laptop in a room in southern Ohio, scrolling through job listings that all demanded a past I no longer had or a future I couldn't imagine. Then I saw it. A posting for a night guard at Ohio University. The pay was shockingly good, and it came with university-provided housing, a lifeline. But the description was odd. It wasn't looking for a security professional. It sought an applicant comfortable with cyclical, non-standard duties and possessing a high tolerance for profound isolation. It was a job description written by someone who knew the meaning of true loneliness. It was written for me. The interview was in a small, sterile office in the campus administration building. The hiring manager, Eleanor Graves, was a woman who seemed carved from old, patient stone. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the desk, and when she looked at me, her eyes didn't just see the nervous man in the ill-fitting suit. They seemed to inventory the wreckage I was dragging behind me. She didn't ask about my family or my history. She asked if I could follow instructions without question. "The employment contract is absolute, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice a low, even hum that vibrated in the quiet room. "The duties are simple, but they are not flexible. Deviation is not grounds for termination, but for consequence." Consequence, not a reprimand, not getting fired. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and cold. I should have walked out. I should have run. But the thought of another night in that motel, another day with nothing but the roaring silence in my head, was more terrifying. I signed the papers. My first night on the job felt like a fever dream. The security office was a small, brightly lit box in the heart of the sprawling, darkened campus. The man I was taking over for was waiting for me. His name was Arthur Penn, a veteran guard whose face was a mask of such deep-set exhaustion that he looked more like a topographical map of suffering than a man. His eyes were sunken, burned-out things. He grunted a hello and gestured toward a thick, university-branded employee manual sitting on the desk. "Official procedure," he rasped, his voice dry as dust. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he picked it up and tossed it into the trash can. It landed with a hollow thud. From his worn jacket pocket, he produced a single, yellowed card, laminated and worn smooth at the edges from years of handling. He slid it across the desk. The title was printed in stark, block letters, "The Nightly Pact." I picked it up. It felt strangely heavy. Below the title, the rules were laid out, a descent into pure madness. The first was for Wilson Hall. "The lights in room 237 are a memory. Do not acknowledge it. The reflections in the glass can see you, even if the figures within cannot." The next, for Crawford Hall, was even stranger. "The basement door is an offering. Close it. The voice you hear will use your own memories against you. The sound that follows is the price for its silence." My eyes scanned down the list, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. A general warning followed. "Encounters after 2 a.m. Request their student ID. backward. If they falter, they are a forgery. Do not touch them. They are contagious. Break eye contact and leave. It went on, each rule a new layer of impossibility. For Morton Hall, the music in room 311 is a ritual. If you interrupt it, it will find a new instrument. It may choose your bones. For Bromley Hall, the north stairwell is unstable between 3 and 4 a.m. It does not always connect to the same version of the building. Then came Bentley Hall. Professor Alistair Roth believes he is still employed. His research ended in 1987. Do not grant him access to his materials. The directives grew more cryptic. For Lincoln Hall, there are 12 doorways. If you find a 13th, the building is offering you a key. Do not accept it. The final rule was for the main stage on campus. For Templeton Blackburn Auditorium, the curtains seal the stage. What is behind them is not a play, it is a verdict. Do not look. I stared at the card, a cold laugh bubbling in my throat. It had to be a prank, a hazing ritual for the new guy. This is insane, I muttered, looking up at Arthur. The exhaustion on his face vanished, replaced by something hard and brittle. He leaned forward, the fluorescent office lights carving deep shadows under his eyes. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial, chilling whisper. "You think so?" he said. "My last trainee, a kid named Julian Croft, thought so too. He thought he was clever. Thought he could talk his way out of Rule 2. Stood there at the Crawford Hall basement door and tried to reason with it." Arthur leaned back, a terrible final finality in his gaze. "Now he is the sound you're not supposed to listen to." The security office door clicked shut behind me, the sound swallowed by a campus that had gone unnervingly still. The night air was heavy and cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and cut grass, a wholesome smell that felt like a lie. In my hand, the laminated Pact card was a small, rigid rectangle of insanity. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation, a logical framework for Arthur's warning. It was an elaborate prank, a story refined over years to terrify the new hire. Julian Croft was probably a bartender in town, laughing about it with Arthur over beers. It had to be. But as I walked the deserted pavement paths, the silence began to feel less like peace and more like a held breath. The familiar brick buildings, so welcoming by day, loomed like colossal sleeping beasts in the dark. The amber glow of the security lights pooled on the ground, creating islands of safety in a vast, black ocean. My first destination was Wilson Hall. The lights in room 237 are a memory. The words were a nonsensical refrain in my head. I saw it from 100 yards away. A single, soft light on the second floor of the otherwise dark building. It wasn't the harsh fluorescent of a utility light. It was a warm, gentle glow, the kind that spills from a bedside lamp. My heart gave a painful thud against my ribs. A student forgot to turn it off. A cleaner was in there. There were a dozen explanations. But the cold, dread coiling in my gut didn't care about explanations. Following the rule, I kept my eyes fixed on the concrete path in front of me. I wouldn't look. I would walk past, turn the corner, and it would be done. My neck muscles strained with the effort of not turning my head. My entire being was screamingly aware of that light to my left. It felt like a presence, a quiet and patient observer. As I drew level with the building, I chanced to look, not at the window itself, but at the large glass pane of the bus stop shelter across the path. A foolish, fatal compromise. In the dark reflection, I could see the illuminated window of room 237, and inside, a shape, a silhouette, tall and indistinct, stood in the center of the room. As I watched, paralyzed, the reflection of that shadowy figure slowly, deliberately, turned its head. It wasn't looking around the room. It was looking directly at my reflection, at me. Then, a featureless face tilted, and it smiled. It was a wide, predatory grin that stretched impossibly far, a slash of deeper darkness in the shadow. A shock of absolute cold jolted through me, so intense it felt like being submerged in freezing water. My breath hitched, my feet rooted to the spot. It knew I was there. It had seen me through the reflection. The air in my lungs turned to ice. I finally tore my eyes away, stumbling forward in a blind panic, my heart hammering a frantic, painful rhythm. The prank was over. This was real. My hands trembled so badly I could barely read the Pact card under the next security light. Crawford Hall. The basement door is an offering. The voice will use your memories. Arthur's words about Julian Croft echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of my own mind. Now he is the sound. Crawford Hall was an older, Gothic-style building, all sharp angles and deep-set windows that looked like vacant eyes. I found the basement door down a short flight of stone steps on the building's north side. It was thick, wooden, and just as the card had promised, it was ajar. A thin slice of perfect, impenetrable blackness waited within. I reached for the handle, my arm feeling impossibly heavy. And then I heard it. "Caleb?" The voice was a ghost wearing the sound of my wife. It was Sarah, not a vague approximation, but her. Down to the soft, breathy way she always said my name. I froze, my hand hovering inches from the door. "Honey, is that you?" the voice whispered from the darkness. It was so clear, so close. My carefully constructed dam of grief and denial shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Sarah!" I choked out, the name tasting of ash and agony. "I was so scared," she whimpered, and the sound broke me. "Remember that little cafe by the river? You said you'd always find me." She was using our memories, weaving them into a lure. It was a specific, private moment from our first anniversary, a promise I had failed to keep. Tears streamed down my face, hot and shameful. My rational mind screamed that it was a trick, a cruel mimicry, but my broken heart didn't care. It was her. "You couldn't save me then, honey," the voice pleaded, its tone shifting, becoming more desperate, more demanding. "But you can let me out now, please. Just open the door. Let me out." Sobbing, a raw, animal sound torn from my throat, I remembered the rule. Close it. My grief warred with a primal, instinctual terror. With a final, agonized cry, I lunged forward and slammed the heavy door shut. The latch clicked with a deafening finality. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, from behind the door came the reply. It wasn't a scream or a cry. It was a wet, sickening tear. A slow, deliberate sound, like a butcher ripping a thick sheet of canvas and sinew apart in the dark. It was the price for its silence. And in that horrifying final sound, I understood. Julian Croft wasn't a bartender. He was the receipt. The sound from behind the Crawford Hall basement door faded, but it didn't leave me. It burrowed into my memory, a permanent fixture in the gallery of horrors my mind was becoming. I stumbled back from the door, my legs weak and shaking, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The cool night air felt thick and suffocating. It was real, all of it. The Pact wasn't a hazing ritual. It was a survival manual for a world that operated on a set of broken, predatory laws. My skepticism, my desperate hope for a rational explanation, had been scoured away, leaving behind the raw, polished bone of terror. My patrol route was a sentence, and I had no choice but to carry it out. Every rustle of leaves in the wind was a footstep. Every distant creak of a building settling was a door opening. The campus was no longer empty, it was just very good at hiding. Next was Morton Hall, home of the music department. I could hear it long before I saw the building, a piano. It wasn't the sound of a student practicing scales or fumbling through a classical piece. The notes were dissonant, clashing against each other in a way that felt deliberate and malevolent. It was the sound of a migraine made audible. The Pact's rule for this was simple. The music in room 311 is a ritual. If you interrupt it, it will find a new instrument. It may choose your bones. As I drew closer, the sound intensified until it was no longer just entering my ears. It became a physical intrusion, a pressure building behind my eyes. The discordant chords seemed to vibrate deep inside my skull, vibrating in sympathy with my own thoughts. It felt like the music was trying to find a frequency, a key to unlock my mind and rearrange the contents. The melody, if you could call it that, twisted and turned, and with each jarring shift, a flash of memory would splinter in my head. Sarah's laugh, the crunch of glass from the accident, the sterile white of the hospital ceiling. The music was feeding on my pain, trying to retune my very consciousness to its own agonizing key. The pain was exquisite, a sharp, piercing agony that was both overwhelming and strangely intimate. I gritted my teeth, squeezed my eyes shut, and forced myself to keep walking, to pass the building without stopping, without crying out. To interrupt felt like suicide. I was half a block away before the pressure in my head subsided, leaving a dull, throbbing ache and a profound sense of violation. I leaned against a tree, gasping, checking my watch. It was 2:17 a.m., encounters after 2 a.m., the next rule on the list. My path took me toward Bromley Hall, a towering 9-story residence hall, and that's when I saw her. A young woman stood under a lone security light near the entrance, looking lost. She was drenched, her dark hair plastered to her scalp and face, her clothes clinging to her frame as if she'd just climbed out of a lake. Water dripped from her, forming a dark, spreading puddle at her feet. As I got closer, the smell hit me. It wasn't the clean scent of rain or pool water. It was the thick, cloying stench of decay, of sulfur and stagnant swamp mud. My heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm. This was it. "Excuse me, miss, are you all right?" I managed, my voice strained. She looked up, and for a second, her face was just a face, young, pale, with wide, dark eyes. "I think I'm lost," she said, her voice a little watery, a little weak. I clung to the rule like a holy text. "I can help you, but I need to see your student ID first. Can you please state your full name and student ID number for me?" "Backward." She smiled, a slight, shy thing. "Of course. Read Clara. Number is 9721538. She faltered on the last 2 digits, her brow furrowing in confusion. A forgery. The pact was clear. Do not touch them. They are contagious. Break eye contact and leave. The moment she failed the test, the air grew heavy and charged. I started to take a step back, breaking my gaze. "I'm sorry," I began. "I can't." "Please," she whispered, and her smile widened, but it was wrong. It stretched too far. Her face didn't just ripple, it fractured, like a corrupted video file trying to load. Her features began to glitch and tear. For a horrifying instant, the image of her face dissolved into a cascade of screaming, pixelated agony, a digital void of pure noise where her eyes and mouth should have been. Then it snapped back to the image of the pale, wet girl. Her laugh wasn't human. It was the wet, choked gurgle of a fluid-filled lung. I didn't need to be told twice. I broke eye contact, spun around, and fled. I didn't run, I scrambled, my feet slipping on the pavement as a new sound reached me. It came from the direction of Bromley's forbidden north stairwell. It was a heavy, dragging noise, a rhythmic, grating scrape that sounded exactly like a slab of wet concrete being dragged slowly, deliberately, over a floor of broken glass. I didn't look back, I just ran, the girl's gurgling laugh and the sound of the stairwell chasing me into the all-consuming darkness of the night. Running felt useless. You can't outrun something that's already waiting for you at your next destination. The gurgling laugh of the wet girl, Clara Reed, seemed to have stained the air itself. Every shadow I passed seemed to drip with it. I was no longer a man running from guilt. I was a lab rat running a maze designed by a psychopath. And the walls were closing in with every completed task. The Pact card in my hand felt less like a guide and more like a script, and my only role was to hit my marks and say my lines before the next horror show began. My route led me to Lincoln Hall, a squat, unassuming brick building that housed administrative offices. By day it was a place of paperwork and quiet bureaucracy. By night it was just another stop on my tour of damnation. The rule for this place felt like a riddle. There are 12 doorways. If you find a 13th, the building is offering you a key. Do not accept it. I walked the main ground floor corridor, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous swath across the polished floor. I counted them. 4 doors on the left, 4 on the right, 2 at the far end, and the 2 I had entered through. 12. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was a normal hallway. I did a slow turn, sweeping my light back the way I came, just to be sure. And there it was, between 2 classroom doors on the right, where a moment ago there had been only a section of blank cream-colored wall, was a 13th doorway. It wasn't made of wood or any other material I could name. It was a perfect, sharp-edged rectangle of absolute featureless black. It was a hole in the world. My flashlight beam didn't reflect off it. The light simply died as it touched the edge, consumed completely. The air around it was unnaturally still, and all sound seemed to go flat and dead in its presence. I took a hesitant step closer and felt it, a low, hungry thrumming that wasn't a sound but a vibration I felt in the fillings of my teeth and the marrow of my bones. It pulsed with a silent, hypnotic rhythm, a deep and ancient beat. The Pact said it was an offer, a key. As I stood there, mesmerized by the sheer wrongness of it, I felt a terrifying, magnetic pull. It wasn't a physical force, but an insidious suggestion planted deep in my mind. Touch it. Open it. See what's inside. You deserve to know. You deserve an escape. My hand began to rise of its own volition, my fingers tingling with a strange energy, drawn toward the void. I was an inch away when some primal survival instinct screamed. I flinched back as if I'd touched a live wire, a jolt of psychic cold shooting up my arm. The pull vanished, replaced by a profound sense of revulsion. I had nearly given in. I turned and fled the hallway. The image of that perfect, light-eating rectangle burned onto the inside of my eyelids. Shaking, I consulted the Pact card again, my world shrinking to that single, yellowed piece of plastic. Bentley Hall. Professor Alistair Roth. His research ended in 1987. A man was waiting for me at the main entrance to Bentley, just as I knew someone would be. He looked the part of an aging academic, tweed jacket with worn elbow patches, wire-rimmed glasses, and a cascade of untidy gray hair. He looked harmless, anxious, and utterly human. "Ah, security," he said, his voice a reedy, hopeful tenor. "Excellent. I seem to have misplaced my key card." "I'm Professor Alistair Roth. I simply must get into my lab. I'm on the verge of a breakthrough with my fossil specimens." He gave me a congenial smile, but his eyes were wide, fixed on the doors behind me with a desperate, obsessive hunger. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "I'm sorry, sir," I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. "I can't let you in." "Nonsense, my boy," he insisted, stepping closer. "It's imperative. My research. It's my life's work. The university knows how important it is." "Professor," I said, planting my feet, the words of the Pact a shield and a curse. "Your access has been revoked. Your research concluded in 1987. The genial mask on his face didn't fall, it shattered. His jaw unhinged with a dry crack, and his body distorted with a violent, wrenching spasm. For a single, horrifying second, the human form of Professor Roth peeled back like old wallpaper. Beneath the illusion of skin and tweed, I saw what he truly was. Layers of ancient, fossilized rock, teeming with the screaming, chittering husks of countless insects, all writhing in a packed, geological mass. It was a living grave, a hive of stone and time. He, or it, let out a shriek. It was not the sound of a man or any living creature. It was the sound of continents breaking apart, of tectonic plates grinding together under impossible pressure. The sound tore through the air, and in the space between one heartbeat and the next, he was gone. There was no puff of smoke, no fade. Just an empty space on the pavement where he had stood, and a high-pitched, grinding echo that slowly scraped itself into silence. I was left alone in the night, with the certain knowledge that I was not guarding a campus from ghosts. I was guarding it from things that were impossibly, terrifyingly older than the very ground I was standing on. The grinding shriek of Professor Roth's departure had scraped my nerves raw. I was no longer just scared. A new and dreadful understanding was beginning to dawn. I was a groundskeeper in a cemetery of living ideas, a zookeeper for things that should not be. Each rule on the Pact card was a lock on a different cage, and I was the man walking the corridor with the keys, praying the bars would hold for one more night. My patrol took me toward the grandest building on campus, the Templeton Blackburn Auditorium. Its tall white columns gleamed in the security lights, a monument to art and culture. But tonight, it felt like a mausoleum. The rule for this place was an order and a warning. The curtains seal the stage. What is behind them is not a play, it is a verdict. Do not look. As I approached the wide stone steps, a new sound began to separate itself from the gentle rustle of the oak leaves. It was a low, resonant hum, a malevolent vibration that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the auditorium. It grew louder, coalescing into a unified, rhythmic chant. It was the sound of many voices, speaking as one. Our memory holds this ground. Our memory holds this ground. The words were flat, devoid of passion, a statement of indisputable, eternal fact. They were the sound of possession. The front doors of the auditorium stood wide open, a gaping maw leading into the deep darkness of the lobby. I knew I should turn away, that my route only required me to pass by, but the chant was a hook, and it had set itself in me. From the profound shadows of the lobby, a single figure emerged. He was dressed in the tattered, faded blue uniform of a Union soldier from a war fought and decided more than a century and a half ago. His form was hazy, indistinct at the edges, but his eyes were fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. He wasn't a man, he was a vessel. When he spoke, his voice was not his own. It was a hollow echo, as if the words were being spoken from a great and terrible distance down a long, empty hall. "You walk on our soil," the vessel said. "You breathe our air. You will bear witness." Behind him, inside the auditorium, the great heavy curtains on the main stage began to part. They slid open not with the smooth whir of a pulley system, but with a groaning, funereal slowness, revealing the cavernous darkness of the stage beyond. A foolish, fatal curiosity seized me. I had to know what verdict lay waiting there. I looked. My mind shattered. It was not a cemetery that I saw. I was shown one. A silent, looping vision of every violent death the campus had ever hosted was poured directly into my consciousness. It was a tangible archive of suffering, a psychic onslaught of final moments. I saw a young man in the 1920s letting go of the bell tower railing, his face a mask of quiet despair as he fell forever. I saw a girl in a 1970s dorm room, the scene repeating in a silent, grainy loop of grief. I saw a duel from the 1800s, two young men with pistols, their shock and pain forever etched onto their faces. A construction worker crushed under a falling beam, a student's car crash on the icy roads bordering the campus, a forgotten act of violence in a dark alley. It was an endless, silent reel of agony, and I felt the psychic residue of every single one, the shock, the pain, the regret, the terror. The weight of it buckled my knees, and I fell to the ground, clutching my head as the last image, the verdict, burned itself into my memory. I scrambled away, crab walking backward before finding my feet and stumbling into the night, my own thoughts no longer my own. I needed to hide, to find a place where the echoes couldn't reach me. My panicked flight led me to Ellis Hall, a building known for its history, a place that had once suffered a terrible fire. I pushed inside, seeking the quiet sanctuary of its empty hallways. The moment I stepped across the threshold, the air changed. It grew thick and warm, and the sounds of the night, the crickets, the wind, vanished, replaced by a deep, oppressive silence. The smell was wrong. It was the scent of old paper, of dry dust, and beneath it, something else. The odor of searing heat, but with no smoke to accompany it. I had walked into a memory. I had stumbled into a time slip. The hallway before me flickered. In the phantom light of silent, ethereal flames that licked up the walls without consuming them, I saw them. Students. Dozens of them, sitting at desks that weren't there, their faces illuminated by the ghostly fire. They were engulfed in the silent, cold flames, yet they paid them no mind. Their brows were furrowed in concentration, their hands scribbling furiously on notebooks that were nothing but air. The horror wasn't the fire. It was their terrifying, unbreakable focus. They were trapped in the final moments before their death, so locked on their final exams that their minds were forcing them to ignore the sensory agony of being burned alive. They were taking their tests in hell for all eternity. I felt their torment as a wave of heat in my own mind, a desperate, frantic need to finish, to solve the equation, to write the essay, all while a silent, internal scream of unimaginable pain was being violently suppressed. I could feel their burning. With a choked cry, I lurched backward, tripping over the threshold and falling out into the cool, clean air of the present. The vision was gone, but the sensation lingered. A scent clung to my clothes, my skin, my soul, not of smoke, but of something far worse. It was the smell of psychic immolation, the stench of agony made eternal. The smell of burned minds clung to me like a shroud. I staggered across the South Green, the manicured lawns and stately oaks, a grotesque parody of collegiate peace. The visions from the auditorium and the silent screams of Ellis Hall had overloaded my senses, leaving me frayed and brittle. I was no longer just a participant in this nightly horror. I was becoming a part of it, a new thread woven into its tapestry of suffering. My own guilt, the very thing that had driven me to this place, felt small and insignificant now, a single drop in an ocean of ancient agony. Ahead of me, Scott Quad was bathed in the pale, sterile light of the campus security lamps. It should have been empty. It wasn't. They were waiting for me, dozens of them, standing silent and still on the grass. There was the Union soldier from the auditorium, a stoic and timeless sentinel. There was Professor Roth, his human form flawlessly reconstructed, his hands clasped patiently behind his back. And near the front, standing with an unnatural stillness, was Clara Reed, the wet girl from Bromley. The sulphurous scent of the swamp still hung faintly around her. They weren't just waiting, they were a jury. As I approached, a wave of collective pressure washed over me, a silent, unified judgment that was more terrifying than any sound. Their faces were impassive, their human masks worn with an unnerving perfection, but behind the facade, I felt the cold, alien weight of their true natures. The game was over. My desperate attempts to follow the Pact, to survive the night, had led me here, to this silent and final confrontation. Clara Reed stepped forward. The water that dripped from her hair and clothes seemed to fall without a sound, vanishing before it could touch the grass. When she spoke, her voice was not the weak, gurgling whisper from before. It was clear, cold, and utterly devoid of any human warmth, like the sound of ice cracking in the deep dark. "You have followed the rules, Caleb Vance," she stated. It wasn't a question or a commendation, it was an observation. "You have closed the door. You have respected the ritual. You have feared what you were meant to fear." "What do you want?" I managed, my own voice trembling. "You believe the Pact is for your safety," she continued, her eyes holding mine with an unblinking, predatory focus. "A set of instructions to navigate the dangers of this place. You are mistaken." She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of the gathered entities press down on me. "The Pact is not for safety. It is a contract of consumption. We are the system. You are the resource. Your belief, your fear, your pathetic attempts to obey. They make our reality stronger and yours more fragile." The truth of her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't a warden. I was food. My terror was the energy that lit the phantom lamp in Wilson Hall. My grief was the offering that empowered the voice in Crawford Hall. My obedience was the force that held these impossible beings together. To follow the rules was to feed the machine that was slowly grinding me into dust. A slow, agonizing death by 1,000 psychic paper cuts. A surge of defiant rage born of pure terror burned through me. "No," I said, the word raw and loud in the crushing silence. "No more. I'm done. I'll break every rule. I'll open the door. I'll interrupt the music. I'll look behind the curtain again." A flicker of something, amusement, surprise, passed through the assembled jury. The atmosphere, which had been menacingly patient, snapped taut. It became sharp, focused, and overwhelmingly predatory. Professor Roth took a step forward, his genial mask tightening. "A bold declaration," he said, his voice the dry rustle of old paper. "But defiance has its own consequences. You speak of Julian Croft. You wear his fate like a shroud of second-hand fear. You wish to see what becomes of those who try to break the contract?" I stared at him, my heart hammering. This was it, the final threat. "Show me." I spat, the words tasting like recklessness and finality. Clara Reed gave a slight, chilling nod. "We will take you to him," she said. But her tone made it clear this was not a negotiation. It was a summons. "Come." She turned and began to walk, and the others parted to form a gauntlet. I had no choice but to walk through it. As I passed between them, their human masks began to thin, to lose their integrity. For fractions of a second, I saw what lay beneath, the impossible, alien geometries of their true forms. The Union soldier's face momentarily dissolved into a constellation of cold, distant stars. Professor Roth's features swam, revealing the chittering, fossilized hive within. Clara's face became a swirling vortex of black, silent water. They were not ghosts. They were something far, far worse, and they were leading me to the heart of their prison. They led me across the darkened campus to a nondescript service building behind the hulking form of the power plant. The air here was thick with the hum of machinery and the faint, acrid smell of ozone. Professor Roth produced a simple, old-fashioned key and unlocked a heavy door marked Central Storage. He pushed it open, revealing a flight of concrete stairs descending into absolute darkness. The air that rose to meet us was cold and ancient, carrying a scent of damp stone and something else, something organic and fundamentally wrong. My escorts did not follow me down. They stood back, a silent, expectant gallery. Clara Reed gestured with one dripping hand toward the abyss. "The truth you seek is down there," she said, her voice once again a flat, emotionless statement. "Go." With no other choice, I descended, my footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The stairs ended in a vast, cavernous space that defied all logic. This was no university storage room. The walls were a sickening fusion of ancient, weeping stone and glistening, organic-looking cables that pulsed with a slow, sickly inner light. They snaked across the floor and ceiling, disappearing into the rock like grotesque veins, forming a biomechanical web that seemed to hold the very foundations of the campus together. The room throbbed with a low, sub-audible hum, the same hungry vibration I'd felt from the 13th door in Lincoln Hall, but magnified 1,000 times. This was the source. Against the far wall was a bank of monitors, but they weren't made of glass and plastic. They were dark, liquid pools of shadow, their surfaces rippling like disturbed water. Within them I saw fractured, real-time images of the campus. The light in Wilson 237 glowing softly, the basement door of Crawford Hall shut tight, the faint, discordant melody wavering in the air around Morton Hall. It was a control room for reality itself. And then I saw him. He was in the center of the room, and he was the central node. It was Julian Croft, or what was left of him. He was a pale, hollowed-out figure, his skin translucent and stretched taut over his bones. He was sitting in a crude chair, but he was no longer separate from the machinery of the room. Glistening, root-like wires grew from the floor and walls, burrowing into his flesh at his neck, his spine, and his arms, pulsing in time with the light in the walls. His eyes were open, but they saw nothing in the room, They were staring into a vast inner distance. He was not a prisoner. He was an interface. He was a human component plugged into the heart of the machine. He turned his head slowly, the movement stiff and unnatural. A faint, crackling sound, like static, filled the air when he spoke. "Caleb Vance," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "I wondered when you'd arrive." "Julian?" I breathed, horrified. "What is this? What have they done to you?" A flicker of something, pain, memory, regret, passed over his face before being subsumed by a placid emptiness. "They didn't do this to me," he whispered, the static crackling. I did. I tried to reason with it. I tried to apply logic where none exists. I broke the pact. He gestured weakly with a hand, the wires tethering him twitching. "This is the consequence." He looked at the shimmering, impossible monitors. "You think you're guarding a university. You're not. This place, it's a reality contagion. A quarantine zone for a cosmic horror that is leaking into your world. A kind of conceptual cancer. It infects places, ideas, memories. The Pact isn't a set of rules for you. It's a containment protocol. The guards, we're not liaisons. We are the wardens in a prison that is consuming its own walls." As he spoke, new figures began to coalesce from the shadows at the edge of the room. They were not like the others. They were not wearing human masks. They were tall, draped in shadow, their forms shifting and indistinct, hinted at but never fully seen. They were the architects, the true prison keepers. An ancient, non-human intelligence radiated from them, a coldness that dwarfed every other fear I had felt tonight. Julian Croft looked past me, at the newly arrived entities. His voice was flat, a messenger delivering a final, unavoidable truth. "They feed on the energy your belief generates. Your fear stabilizes the quarantine. But the quarantine is failing. The walls are getting thin. They need a more active participant." One of the shadow-draped figures glided forward. A voice spoke, not from a mouth but directly inside my mind. A voice made of ice and gravity and the crushing pressure of the deepest sea. "You see the choice," it said. "The system requires a warden, a conscious, willing warden to reinforce the protocols. Or it requires a new component to power the machine." It was the ultimatum. There was no escape. There was no fighting back. I could either take the chair and become a willing warden, a collaborator in this cosmic horror story, or I could be consumed, broken down, and integrated into the wailing, mindless machinery of the prison itself. I could become another screaming, static-filled anomaly like Julian Croft. There was no third option. The silence in that biomechanical cavern was absolute, a crushing weight that pressed in from all sides. The ultimatum hung in the air, cold and sharp. Become a warden or become a battery, a collaborator or a component. Before me, Julian Croft sat as a testament to the alternative. A hollowed-out man, his humanity siphoned away to power the very prison he was meant to guard. His empty eyes were a mirror showing me my own potential future. Escape was a fantasy. Fighting was suicide. Defiance was just another path to the same horrific end. In the face of such impossible, ancient power, my will was meaningless. My life, my guilt, my desperate flight from my past. It had all led me to a choice that was no choice at all. I looked at the dark, silent architects of this place, the beings of shadow and gravity, and I felt the last remnants of my hope crumble into dust. "I accept," I said. The words felt alien in my mouth, a surrender so total it scraped my soul raw. "I'll be the warden." One of the ancient entities glided forward. Its shadowy form solidified just enough for me to see it extend something that might have been a hand. In it, it held a sliver of sharpened obsidian, a blade that seemed to drink the pulsing light from the room, leaving only a sliver of perfect cutting darkness. It gestured for my hand. My own hand trembled as I held it out, palm up. The ritual was a branding, a claim of ownership. The entity took my hand, its touch colder than a grave. With a slow, deliberate motion, It carved a spiraling symbol into my palm. There was no pain, not in the way I understood it. There was only a profound, searing cold that sank deep into my flesh, my bones, and beyond. As the cut was made, the symbol flared with a cold, black light, a darkness that was somehow luminous. The rules of the Pact, the words I had read from the yellowed card, were no longer just words. They were seared directly onto my soul. I felt them slot into place in my mind, not as instructions to be remembered, but as fundamental laws of my new reality. With the brand came understanding. I could feel the entire campus now, a vast, interconnected network of pain and memory. I could feel the light in Wilson Hall, a lonely echo of a long-dead student. I could feel the hunger behind the Crawford basement door. And beneath it all, I could feel the constant, silent scream of every trapped entity, a low, thrumming chorus of agony that was now a permanent part of my own consciousness. The entity released my hand. The brand on my palm pulsed with its cold, dark light. My old life, my grief for Sarah, my guilt, it was all still there, but it was distant now, a faint signal drowned out by the overwhelming static of the prison. I had one last, desperate question. The job posting, the contract, it all came with a promise, a lie I had clung to. The retirement, I said, my voice hoarse. The contract mentioned a, quote, peaceful crossing for those who complete their service. Another of the ancient entities took on a familiar form, its shadowy features coalescing into the face of a kindly elderly professor, a mask of benign wisdom that was more terrifying than any monster. It gave me a terrible, knowing smile. "Those who serve well are not released, Warden," it said, its voice a smooth, academic tone that curdled in the air. "They are promoted. Their stories, their sacrifices, their pain, it all becomes part of the foundation. Their agony becomes a permanent part of the Pact, a new rule for the next man to follow. Your service will never end. You will simply become a more integral part of the architecture." The coldness that had settled in my bones became a permanent frost. The brand on my hand wasn't just a symbol of my new role, it was the first line of a new rule, with my name already written on it. The epilogue writes itself every night. The months have bled into a year, maybe more. Time has lost its meaning outside the rising and setting of the sun. My humanity has been eroded, worn smooth by the constant friction of my duties. The hollow exhaustion I once saw in Arthur Penn's face is now my own reflection in the dark, liquid monitors of the control room. I am efficient, I am patient, I am empty. Tonight, I watch on the monitors as a new recruit arrives, Leo Diaz. He looks young, terrified, and running from something I can already smell on him, a fresh, potent guilt. He's perfect. He will fear correctly. He will obey. He will provide the energy the system requires. I stand up from my chair, the strange root-like wires that connect me to the system retracting with a soft, wet sound into the floor. The brand on my hand gives a faint, cold pulse. I walk up the stairs and into the security office, where the young man is waiting, his eyes wide with a mixture of hope and dread. I am preparing to brief him, to hand him the yellowed card, to tell him the story of his predecessor. But I know the truth now. I am no longer just training a replacement. I am calibrating the next component for the machine. The cycle of damnation is eternal, and it is my sworn duty to make sure it continues.